Okay. Hello again. I'm here again with Derek Lacey of The Art of Falling Asleep, and this is the second video in a series of 4 where we are discussing and introducing the underlying principles of the art of falling asleep. So we're on number 2, and I'll tell you what this one is called, and then I'll explain it just very briefly because I think it needs a little bit of explanation. But it's the individual touchstones are as important as sleep itself. And the individual touchstones relate to the art of falling asleep. I never know what to call it, Derek. Protocol, ritual, whatever. Ritual.
Ceremony or ritual.
Ceremony is nice, yeah. Where there are touchstones that we would take you through and teach you on the way to sleep. And one of the things that most people are trying to do when it comes to sleep are just go straight to sleep and kind of not really think about the process. So this whole underlying principle here is talking about the ritual itself as being the true goal. So we just want to have a discussion around that, again, probably for about half an hour, something like that. And again, as always, if anyone has any questions, please get in touch during the call, after the call, because these are not completed kind of conversations. They're starting points to conversations, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'll hand over to you, Derek, just to explain firstly a little bit about this one.
I love what you just said as a starter, because this is the vision for the Art of Falling Asleep community that will be coming soon, is really to take these teachings that have been presented to me, just with the responsibility of decoding them as best as possible, and then bringing them to live conversations for contemplation, for discussion, collaboration, so that these principles, maybe they stay the same, but they have more depth to them, depth as a result of the contribution of the community and pointing out things that you and I have blind spots to. So none of this is dogmatic. It is all intended to reach a deeper truth for sleep.
Yes, and I think what you said then is really important, because as we go through and people learn more about the art of falling asleep and the ceremony, the ritual itself, it's not a theoretical understanding. It's not a mathematical, well, it is mathematical, but it's not like learning maths. It is every touchstone, every principle has this depth to it that is kind of forever able to be explored at greater and greater depth, really, greater levels. So, and that's where this whole art of falling asleep is much more than just a kind of 5 steps to better sleep. It's much more of a lifelong exploration, if you like. And I think that's just that's what I really love about it as well.
And we're just touching like the 0.0001% of where this is going, and which is why I've begun saying that the only intention I have for this is for this to be something that is explored in 1,000 years from now, because there's so much room, because it's sleep. Sleep is the most comprehensive experience of life. So the needle will never stop moving. Never, ever, ever. This is an infinite discussion, and I want people to challenge what they hear. I want them to add to it, because they're ultimately becoming their own guru, if you will. This is about creating the space for them to connect to themselves as a rite of passage into sleep. They don't need to follow any dogma from me or you on how to do that. They just need the space held for that, and they could borrow whatever we present. That is the mathematical correct part. What we present is mathematically correct, because it's checking all these boxes of spirituality, but like circadian rhythm first. None of this, none of this escapes the filter of circadian rhythm. It's all based on melatonin being made in the eyes, collected in the pineal gland, released through the bloodstream, bonded to the pancreas, and then that ATP turning into adenosine that enters the hypothalamus through the leptin receptor. All that is at the foundation of this all. So, and this is why we don't know what it looks like, but people need not just 3 months, like in that typical coaching paradigm. Here's a 10-week, whatever. They need sometimes the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And this
And
is,
that's not because they won't get anything from 10 weeks. It's because this is a beautiful exploration that then begets you wanting to learn more. It's actually not something that's just like a horrible task. It's actually like a beautiful exploration. I
yeah.
think that thing.
Yeah, the 10 weeks is just to bring them to sleep
Mm,
that they thought they were coming here for. And then
yeah.
the rest of their life is to
The rest of
actually
it is everything else.
explore the thing that they was unimaginable to them that they didn't realize was on the other side of sleep.
Exactly. And that's it. So the individual touchstones are just as important as sleep itself.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Um, where where I'd like to start with this is just to reflect on what the art of falling asleep is not, which is a trade-off, a transaction. Like, here's $2, give me my candy bar
Mhm.
and move on. This is what gets people to not understand the resistance that they're presented with, is when they're trying to do something in exchange for sleep on the other side, in exchange for whatever that energy gives them
Mm,
that they're not currently in their mind receiving. This changes that whole fundamental concept. And just by following this principle, you resolve and alchemize so much resistance that doesn't need to be there.
yeah, and when you're saying that, again, just to kind of bring it into um the sleep sufferers terms, I suppose, is that we tend to see sleep as this kind of a destination, right? A goal to achieve. And in that, it gets a weight to it that adds a lot of pressure and adds a lot of heaviness and stress.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so what we're looking at doing here in this principle is kind of taking that off the table, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And there are really simple psychological reasons why this is the case that ends up connecting on a quantum level to, well, this is why you're not sleeping, because the electrons within you that are trying to formulate sleep are now formulating the opposite of that, because they think that that's what you want.
mm,
When sleep becomes a routine that is a transaction,
mm,
or accidentally saying to your body, well, I certainly do not want to have a painful day tomorrow.
mm,
And that becomes the instruction.
mm.
So it's really simple. How do I avoid that
Yeah,
misunderstanding? Well, love the ritual.
yeah.
That's why it's a ritual and ceremony now, not a routine, because there's really not much to love about a
Mm,
routine that's redundant and that doesn't ever change its face. Like, oh, I've got to breathe 5, 5, 7 breaths for 5 minutes. And then I've got to sit in a lavender tub. And then I need to journal. I mean, it takes about 5 days for that to get old. and
Yeah.
stale. A ritual, a proper ritual that matches the frequency of sleep is one that's alive every single night. It looks different every single night because it begins with you looking inside, communicating with yourself, not even knowing what you're going to find. And then once you find that, finding the pleasure,
Mm.
the direction that those findings are taking you.
And that's a really important piece, I think, to this is that genuine pleasure in it. Because we might take pleasure from breathing and having a lavender bath and spraying on our magnesium or whatever, but not in the same way. That's just a kind of thing to do. And it's not often like, I think the frequency of sleep is really important. That to me was certainly a big shift in my understanding of sleep and how the kind of ritual, the touchstones on the way, the journey on the way to sleep being just as important, if not more important than the sleep itself, because what we're doing otherwise is we're kind of going from some crazy day frequency and trying to somehow just sleep in that way.
Mhm.
And there's and even yeah, we can calm the system slightly by some of the techniques, but that doesn't mean we're really still in the kind of sleep frequency that we could be in if we do it the art of falling asleep way,
Yeah,
if you like.
yeah,
And that kind of that presence, I think that this gives you the presence, the depth of presence that the art of falling asleep kind of ritual can give you in comparison to the other bedtime sleep routines is one of the biggest differences. The true presence with it. It's a very different thing to kind of the slightly fake presence that you might get by doing some of the other stuff, you know?
yeah. Love it.
Yeah, not everyone. Some people might find amazing presence in their lavender tub, but you know what I mean? Like the presence, the depth of presence is is more transformational.
And we identified the actual distinction between true presence and the traditional concept of presence through the here and now, because presence is not a matter of time. It's
Mm.
just a frequency of being. And going back to the frequency of sleep and where we left off with the last principle, this is why this one's important because, well, this is why the last principle is important, that it's the body that sleeps, not the mind, because it's when you think it's the mind that sleeps that you apply the routine that
Mm.
will certainly relax you and calm you, but does not take you into the frequency of,
Yes, sleep.
yeah.
Mm.
And what this ritual helps you do, the only goal for this is to help you make the unconscious conscious.
Mm.
Once you make the
Yeah.
unconscious conscious, which is the first part of the ritual, now you have access to the frequency of
Mm.
sleep. And instead of you calming your mind down or you calming your body down,
Mm.
your body's calming itself down and taking you to a frequency where the
Mm.
mind's not needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just reading something that you've written here, which about this, which is the purpose of nighttime preparation is not just to fall asleep, but to connect with yourself along the way. And I think that's again, you know, this and self-connection naturally brings you closer to sleep, while trying to force sleep can actually push it further away. So that's the thing with when we've got our kind of eyes on the prize too much, it becomes a slippery slope. It becomes the kind of this unattainable thing. Whereas we're not, you know, if we're kind of taking that off the table and what we're trying to do is just connect and get into a frequency, the sleep will happen. The sleep
Yeah.
will happen, you know, from a different place without efforting, you know,
Mhm.
really. And I think, and what is interesting on here as well, sleep doesn't respond well to being observed, a quantum rule. You know,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting and I guess that's because, and I'd like to hear more from you on this, but I guess that's because it doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be. It was never set up to be observed. It was just set up to be had. So yeah.
Well, and this is where it's helpful to point out the movement of manifestation and the law of attraction. It's
Mm.
gotten a little bit out of control, in my opinion. And people, and this is, I was introduced to this. I fell for this when I first started coaching and realized, oh my God, I can actually attract sleep. And so you might sit with sleep and then just imagine sleep and say mantras like the sleep's inside of me, the sleep's inside of me. Do that over and over, not
Mm.
realizing that you're doing two things. You're attracting it, you're you're attracting it towards you, and then you're also repelling it.
Well, this is it, right? Because this is where, for me, again, the whole law of attraction thing does get a bit out of control because we're attracting at the level of our deeper presence and self, not really at the mind level of the things we're trying to think about with an affirmation. So we can be affirming one thing, and I guess it has its use. It's not completely invalid, but at the deeper level, we are still in resistance to that thing, right? So that's going to win out every time anyway. The
Mm.
sort of deeper level place that we
The
are.
distinction, sorry, the distinction to make though with manifestation, law of attraction, and the birthrights of us
Mm,
is that if I am manifesting a 400 horsepower tractor, right? I that tractor may not have been part of my divine nature or my birthright.
mm,
Say it's like, well, I could really use this tractor to do X, Y, and Z. I am probably going to read a Joe Dispenza book and use his exercises, get into alpha brain,
mhm,
and and picture this tractor entering my field, turning into white light, then gold light, and then entering my body into my bloodstream through every cell. And now I'm just like, I'm shaking and I'm energetically aligned and correct with this tractor. We use this type of thing in the art of falling asleep.
mm,
But, but I wasn't born on a tractor. So I therefore need to bring that tractor into
mm.
my
Yeah.
field.
Yes.
I was born asleep. I was brought into this world to sleep. It's the first thing I've ever known how to do.
Mm,
Don't need to manifest sleep.
yeah. Yeah.
Right? And this is the difference is that the things that are our birthrights, they just need to be revealed. They
Mm,
don't even need to be revealed. We just need to be removed as the mind that doesn't sleep,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it happens by going slowly,
Yeah.
non-transactionally.
And
With
that is again another point here that's really important, the slowing down. And I think most of us live in a way nowadays, where the slowing down is very resisted on many levels and it feels very uncomfortable to slow down. And so we'd rather kind of race around, and then take something to sleep or be like, why can't I sleep? And it's like, well, you've been racing around for like 17 hours actually, or, and that, but the resistance to actually slowing down and taking part in this kind of a ritual or a ceremony is one of the problems. And it's one of the most important things in this, is that is what we need to do. We cannot do it any other way. We can race around and take two benzos or whatever and fall asleep, whatever we want to do. But that's never going to give us what we're really looking for. It's in that slowing down, which I think is humanity's one of humanity's biggest problems right now, generally.
yeah,
And on a personal level, I can relate. Like that was my path, was learning to slow down and be present. And in that space, the unconscious gets made conscious. We don't often like to see that. And so that's part of this, isn't it? So this is why, again, this is why it's more than just sleep. It's a self-healing modality,
Mhm.
in so many ways. But this whole point of this principle of about embracing the touchstones rather than racing straight to sleep, like that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? That's why. And the touchstones, we're not going to talk about them per se in this call, because that's a whole other sort of part of the training and the ritual. But there are 5 kind of specific touchstones on the journey to sleep that Derek has sort of developed as the art of falling asleep, just so you know what we're referring to when we talk about touchstones. And they're all part of this, of the process of the art of falling asleep. But it's that, it's in doing that and in being present to that, that's where the alchemy lives.
Yeah. I love you. Listen to you. You're all the work like this has been, I've craved for years to have somebody to discuss, on a like spiritual but also professional level, these concepts. I love hearing. I had to like pause to say that. Yeah, that's just so well said. In the next reason that this principle is important is that currently anybody who's not sleeping as well as they desire and know they can be is in a predicament where all of the reasons that you stated for the result of how we live now, the path of least resistance is to transition quickly and then try to go to sleep. And this is where the mind starts to move faster than the body, thinking it's the one that's asleep. So I want to acknowledge that, yes, it's almost a little unfair that when you're getting that cue, like, okay, I should start preparing for bed. I want to acknowledge that, yes, you are going to be tempted. You're naturally tempted now just to jump in bed and kind of hope, like, all right, I hope this is the time that it just,
Yeah, and especially when you're feeling that nice tiredness, you kind of go, oh, this is okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I've got it.
right, right. Yeah, the cue. And that's that. It could be a bit of a bait and switch,
Mm,
that cue of sleepiness that says, hey, even though you haven't paused to feel whatever needs to be felt because you're avoiding it, but all you have to do to stop avoiding it is make a little bit of contact with it, um, the path of least resistance. It's always going to, like, yeah, part of me wishes I can just push a button
mm, mm.
and wake
But
up on
that's
the other
part of
side.
all of us that wants everything to be like that in life. That's
Right.
and this is why this is a lot, and this is why I was so attracted to your work and to the whole vibe, because it's everything I believe and work with and teach, right? This part is more than any of it, I suppose, actually. This whole, you've got here on something that you've written here about it, fear of the void, why we resist true rest. And this is all of it. Many people subconsciously avoid the depth of sleep preparation because they fear what they will find in themselves. And that is absolutely huge. And and it's not crazy that we resist that. And as I know you teach and say and believe, like in that resistance is so much wisdom. The resistance isn't the problem, but and that's why we can look at it. We can look at it safely,
Mhm.
and even the resistance isn't something just to push through and pretend isn't there. It's the wisdom is in the resistance. The wisdom is, we don't want to touch the void. We don't want to go into stillness. We don't want to, we're subconsciously scared of what we might find in that place. And there's wisdom in that.
The wisdom in the resistance is like the frosting for the sleep chemicals that the body made throughout the day, right?
Mm,
Complement that. That is the part that actually allows the sleep to go really, really, really deep and for the soul to travel home and then for the body to restore the way it was designed to restore without your knowledge. It's in
mm,
the resistance. That's where the gift is. It truly is.
yeah.
Beautiful thing about this is that the touchstones, right? So we've been speaking and through these principles, somebody who perhaps is just like, just please tell me how to sleep. Just show me how to sleep. I don't care about the spiritual crap.
Yeah.
I realize that that is kind of where most people are entering this space from.
Mm.
Here I am after just about 10 years now, exploring this after a lifetime of insomnia. I think several lifetimes of insomnia. On the other side of that, I'm like, oh, you need to like just come check out what it's like, when you alchemize all of that resistance and you're sitting here at the edge of the fourth dimension,
Mm.
in
It's
solid.
almost like, isn't it? I think it's almost like there's a field you can get to which would be okay, like it's an okay looking field, right? And it's got some flowers in it and it's okay. And that's kind of like the sleep you can get, the people who are like, I just need to sleep, I just need to sleep. And you can kind of get that, but then it's then like this is not a perfect example, but it just came to mind. Then it's like an obstacle course. And then beyond the obstacle course is a really, really shit hot, beautiful field, with all of the majesty and all of the beautiful things in it. And it goes much further and it's much more ethereal or whatever. But you do have to kind of go through the obstacle course
Well,
to a certain extent to get there.
yes and no, right?
Mm.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that with everything that has been presented here with the art of falling asleep and the kind of surreal discoverings of like, oh my God, this is what sleep is really for,
Mm.
which isn't helpful to somebody that feels like they've forgotten how to sleep. And this is the importance of the touchstones and why the very first gesture in the very first touchstone is to not do anything, is to do your best impression of taking the arms and legs that you think the mind has that it really doesn't. So you're taking these imaginary legs and tying them, together behind your back, your ankles, the ankles of the mind tied together, and just like sit there. And this is an instruction that anybody can understand, right?
Mm.
Or like a spiritual mandate, where the soul's trying to say to you, it's like, my beautiful mind, who thinks that it's doing 90% of the work, who's actually just doing like 0.9% of the work, maybe.
But it's like I imagine with its little arms and legs just scrabbling around, thinking it's doing everything.
Yeah, and it's like exhausting. Yeah, it's exhausting itself. And it's like, and then the mind looks down and sees like the legs are like losing, building their transparency, starting to disappear. And it's like, oh my God. And I feel no, I never had these arms and legs. And so the very first step, right, in all of these touchstones, they're, I'm going to use my hands now. Uh,
Mhm.
they're all very objective, measurable metrics, right? They're not, the metrics themselves aren't spiritual. It's like, okay, hey, sit down with your mind's arms and legs tied together for 2 minutes. Okay, now what are you feeling? And it might look something like, okay, I'm objectively way more uncomfortable than when I started. Great. You just have sit 3 more minutes. Wow, I got even more uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden the fever broke.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
that's
all of a
very
sudden
important.
there's a perspective shift where
Yeah,
now you're like, ah,
yeah.
that's what I was avoiding, was that discomfort.
Exactly that. And that's what it's a paper tiger, isn't it? That's the whole thing. But yeah, when I like that fever breaks, and that's when it's like so apparent. And we don't, mostly we're not even getting to that. We're going to getting to where the fever might break, and then we're like, oh, we're not letting that play out. We're not letting that happen. I'm just conscious of the time. And I just wanted to, because I think it's all obviously it's all linked, but something else that I've just read here that you've read, it's this idea that we've never historically transitioned immediately from wakefulness to sleep, right? This is a really important part of what we're saying here. You know, we've never just kind of gone from wakefulness to sleep ever, ever, ever. And now we have that even more. We're not doing any of the things that we're just talking about now, but we're also going from blue light onslaught, you know, rapid scrolling on a little handheld worldwide device, you know, all of it, right? Modern life has just gone, we know it's gone crazy. And we would have, you know, in the cave times, we would have kind of had the sun going down. We may have had the fire. We may have sat and danced around the fire and released emotion from the day. We may have, you know, sung and whatever we might have done, you know, whatever. But we would never have been. I mean, we are now in the worst kind of point of in human history of this, aren't we, ultimately? And this is why we need this is why we need this. This is, you know, we wouldn't need this. We've said this before, I know. We wouldn't need this if we were still in caves and around the campfire, you know.
Right. Yeah, but we wouldn't need it because we're already doing it. I'm glad you brought that up. This is the most powerful feature of this principle and the
Mm.
touchstones. You don't have to do this. We talked about this last time. The conscious mind is in a position now where it has to make the decision to do the ritual to connect to itself.
Yes.
When nature, when the I guess the chips in the armor of nature have removed and prevented you from naturally doing something that was built in,
Mm.
that wind down process,
Mm.
and you realize that and say, you know what, I'm gonna recreate that.
Mm. Yeah.
That that is some gangster, powerful beep, like that right there. That is why humanity is being presented with an option to enter a frequency that's never been entered to sleep, because now we're having to decide to do it
Mm.
when in the past that decision was made for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so then, you know, that's why we're here. That's what this is for ultimately. And I think just a couple of these, again, these things that you've already written here that are just so important, and things that people can take right now without even understanding the art of falling asleep ritual itself. Like just from this alone, this information, this knowledge is transformative, because if all you do as a result of hearing this is treat that pre-sleep window as sacred time, you know, if that's all you do right now, that's going to do something for you, right? Like that's the thing, you know, it's like avoiding the rush, deliberately slowing down, you know, recognizing that we're not designed to go from wakefulness to sleep, from onslaught of everything to then suddenly expecting our bodies. Just because we can sleep doesn't mean that's ever how it was set up to happen. You know,
Yeah.
it was never supposed to be like that. It's like honoring the emotional needs that you have before sleep, honoring the energetic needs that you have before sleep, you know, and obviously the art of falling asleep teaches a lot more about what those look like and how we can navigate those. But, you know, that there's transformation just in the understanding that we're doing it, we're just doing it in a backwards way right now,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
What these touchstones are here to help you do is take your temperature.
Yeah.
Imagine, because this is the part when it comes to healing, there's something about going to a doctor and having them take your blood pressure, take your temperature, weigh you, and you feel grounded because you're getting exact feedback.
Mm.
Like, oh, great. And let's just say, and there's the moment where they're, oh, your blood pressure looks great. And there's a part of you you're like, that's right, fantastic, right? You feel better because there's a moment when they're like doing
You're
that
like,
thing. You're like, this is giving me anxiety, you know? And when you kind of pass that test, you relax a little bit. The touchstones are doing the exact same thing. They're getting these readings, and the readings are primary Godfather tool here. It's called the scale of decision. So it's doing the same, it's helping us take the temperature. And then you look at the thermometer and you're like, oh, wow, I'm really trying to control this process right now. And wow, I'm really trying to avoid things. And then
yeah,
you're responding to that temp reading, right? So it's the exact same thing. And again, that the temperature is going to be different every single night. That right there, because the beautiful thing about the tool is that there aren't a lot of ways to, like, it sounds beautiful to say, well, make the unconscious conscious. I'm like, great. How do I do that without needing to access some kind of spiritual thinking that feels above my pay grade? But you're just looking at this thermometer and saying, oh, okay. And you relax into that thing. Oh, I've got a high temperature. Okay,
mm,
well, now what?
mm,
Here, do this next, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's a
and
very hand holding kind of
this, yeah, this is what we need. It can feel the path of least resistance is to go to sleep, but we want to make, there's just that first little bump to go over of realizing that that path of least resistance is an illusion. And if, yeah, if you just take this first step into the touchstones, the first step to grounding, all of a sudden the next path of the greater, the true path of least resistance is to continue seeking the pleasure within each individual touchstone that has nothing to do with sleep because
yeah.
the body's already starting to sleep.
Yeah, and it's not trying to then, rush through, because the temptation again is still to rush through the ritual, rush through the ceremony, but it's that grounding into each step, that understanding that each step is its own, has its own beauty. That's the process as much as anything else, and and there is a practice in that. There is an absolute need to be. It's not a theoretical understanding. It's a doing, isn't it? It's a practice. It's and in that, and again, that's what we need to spend the time in and the put our energy into and embrace. Because on the other side of that, like we say, is something that we can't really imagine before we've done it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So I think just conscious of the time, but um
Probably there's no such thing as time.
no such thing as time. um The conclusion here, though, that you have written up on your little handy manual, conclusion here for this principle number 2 is the invitation to trust yourself. And principle number 2 invites you to trust that who you are at your core is already whole, beautiful, and connected to all things. Rest is not something to be achieved, it's a return to your natural state. And to me, that is just hallelujah. That is it. That is it. So, it's the art of coming home to yourself. It's that's why, again, I see all of this as much bigger than sleep. I was going to say just sleep, but that's not quite true, but it's broader than and deeper than that. It's everything. And it's not about addition, even though there are steps, that there are touchstones, they're not actually like additive in the way that a lot of these kind of protocols are. They're more subtractive. So there is stuff to do. There is, and people might go, oh, I've got to do 5 things before bed, but it's actually not quite like that. It's more of a release and a revealing and a removing and a grounding into what's already there than it is trying to kind of attain something, get something, make something happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
yeah.
what I like to let people know who haven't experienced this is that the first couple of touchstones are the
Mm,
ones where it could be perceived as I'm doing this, but then
mhm.
the last 3 touchstones are extremely passive
Yeah.
and unconscious,
Mm,
where you're actually not doing anything. You're either sitting in a chair or laying in your bed, and
mm,
they're just holding the concepts are holding the space. Like, okay, this is the all you're doing because you're in the frequency of presence. When you're in the
mm,
frequency of presence, there is no such thing as doing or even just being. You're you're alive to what's there with you and embracing
Mm.
that. And that's the goal. So 60 something percent of the touchstones are just you hanging out in the frequency of presence as the true self, right? After
Sounds
you
pretty
talk
cool
about,
to me.
yeah.